Welcome, everyone. Welcome to Marsh Stream. I'm Stephanie Wiseman, Artistic Director of the Marsh and Marsh Stream, and we are so thrilled you are here tonight. Well, things get even crazier and crazier, and we have to be thinking more about our health, like going outside now. I guess it's good we're wearing masks. My goodness, it's such a fiery time right now. Anyway, we are here tonight for Solo Arts Heal. But before we get started with that, let me give you a rundown or run up of what's happening at Marsh Stream for the next week. Tomorrow night, it's Stephanie's Marsh Stream. That's me, my Marsh Stream, and I'm interviewing Jacob Kornbluth, who has been around the marsh working with his brother, Josh Kornbluth, since he was 17 years old, and he's in his 40s now. And his latest project is an animated series with Kamau Bell called Talk Boring to Me. And I can't wait to hear and talk to him about this trajectory from starting to direct his brother's shows, The Moisture Seekers at 17, to now to working with Robert Reich and co-founding Inequality for All. Well, he did that movie, Inequality for All, and now out doing some more things out in the world. So really thrilled about that. On Friday at noon, we have Candace Johnson's Fitness and Singing. And we were wondering, what's more important, the fitness class or the singing class? But I can tell you, they're both intertwined amazingly, and they are both equally important, although I have to say, I never do the fitness part. Then on Friday night, we have bingo with Josh Kornbluth. And that is the craziest bingo, and it's wonderful. And this week, we have contests each week. And this week is dress up or make a design of a postal stamp or be a postal stamp, because we want to get behind the U.S. Postal Service right now. So we are going to be dressing up for them, encouraging them at our bingo class. Or not bingo class, not a class, just our bingo night. And on Saturday, our solo spotlight is Merle Kessler, the famous Ian Scholes, who's been doing shows at the Marsh and so many other things on NBC and Everything Philosophy Talk. And he'll be doing his piece, his stories, The Important Announcer. So, without further ado, let's get started with what we're doing tonight. And one of those things is that we have a tip jar, and we're doing this all for free. All this Marsh Stream, every single night at 7:30, you can see something on Marsh Stream. And we ask that perhaps you might want to consider making a donation in our tip jar. Think of this as a ticket, a $2 ticket, a $4 ticket, a $10 ticket to see a movie, a $25 ticket to see a theater piece. And tonight we are thrilled that we are matched. We have a matching donor to match it. So join us with the tip jar. And also you might want to consider becoming a YouTube subscriber so you always know when our shows are going live on YouTube, as well as seeing them here on Zoom. Okay, let's get to the business on hand tonight. We are thrilled that Bob Brader is here with the wonderful, most wonderful hostess, Gail Schickele, who is heading up this incredible series, Solo Arts Heal, and is also a wonderful climate person and a great friend. So Gail, welcome tonight to Solo Arts Heal. How are you?
I'm great, Stephanie. Thanks so much for having me. I've got my first responder stamps, so I'll have to think about that for the bingo show. And it's just such a thrill to be part of this platform. Thanks for providing the Marsh Stream offering nightly entertainment and community services born from COVID isolation, but inspired by your 30 years of such artistry as the Marsh breeding ground for solo performance. Also, I do want to mention that our thoughts and prayers are with those who are being impacted, as you kind of alluded to, of the California fires. I know our producer, among others, are being affected, and we hold you in our hearts. And good evening to everyone. Welcome to Solo Arts Heal on Stephanie Wiseman's Marsh Stream platform. Here at the Marsh, artists are encouraged and nurtured to explore and experiment in the development of their solo shows. And it's terrific to have our Solo Arts Heal group as part of Marsh Stream, where artists may share inspiring and courageous real-life stories as survivors and caregivers, stories of overcoming adversity, surviving mental and physical challenges, becoming their own health advocates. As we have for you tonight with Bob Brader's daring, uplifting, and often comedic play, Spitting in the Face of the Devil, hailed by critics as brilliant, masterful, and unforgettable. Solo Arts Heal is our gift to the communities we share by offering information and inspiration for individual and community empowerment. Here each week, we shed light on diverse topics of mental and physical health, scenarios that are shared across communities worldwide, offering healing through the arts, through performance and conversations from cancer to caregiving, sexual and domestic violence, OCD, sensory processing disorders, smoking, and more. And now, once a month, we're also addressing the health crisis of climate change and what we can do about it. All these shows present outstanding talent in performance and in talkbacks with guest experts, and with our audience about these varied health issues that embrace the healing power of the arts with drama and with humor. Laughter is the best medicine. Let me introduce you tonight to tonight's featured performer. Bob Brader is an award-winning writer, actor, and monologist. His trio of totally true solo shows, Spitting in the Face of the Devil, Preparation Hex, and Smoker, have toured all over the U.S. and Canada, winning multiple awards and critical and audience acclaim. Through Spitting in the Face of the Devil, Bob has raised both funds and awareness for many nonprofits partners across North America, including New York City's Safe Horizon, Manatee Children's Services in Florida, and Prevent Child Abuse California. Risk podcast creator and host Kevin Allison called Bob's new retelling of the story an absolute stunner, one of our best episodes ever. And Bob is currently working on the book. You're going to find more information about Bob and his show posted in the chat as we progress throughout the evening. And the audience later will be able to join us in the chat with making comments and also asking questions. But now, ladies and gentlemen, please join me in welcoming with a live excerpt from his award-winning Spitting in the Face of the Devil, Bob Brader.
My elementary school had something called the Spring Fling. It was a talent show put on for the whole school and their parents. Now, I wasn't even thinking of entering. I didn't play an instrument or anything like that, so I just ignored it. But then one day, my fourth grade teacher, Miss Schickele, asked me why I wasn't participating in the show. Why? What would I do? Why, your impressions, of course. I could do impressions of different people. I never considered it a talent. It was just something I could do. And for the most part, it came pretty easy to me. I would do people like Howard Cosell or Jimmy Carter. And the only one that I can still do, which is Paul Lynde. Now, if you don't know who Paul Lynde is, he was the center square in the Hollywood Squares. He was Samantha's Uncle Arthur in Bewitched. He was Templeton the Rat in the original Charlotte's Web. You know, I always loved his voice because he was always laughing when he talked. You know, even if what he was saying wasn't funny. Oh, that's so disgusting. So I ran home to talk to my mom about it, and she just looked at me and said, Bobby, you know, I think you can do anything you put your mind to. Well, that was really the only encouragement I needed. I ran upstairs and started working. Now, I never wanted my father to find out about the show, but he did. He was a huge ex-Marine with USMC tattoos on each arm. He told me it stood for Uncle Sam's Misguided Children. He was a well-built guy when he was younger, but now had a comb over and looked a lot like Dom DeLuise, but he was still very powerful. He's the opposite of my mom in almost all respects. He was the center of attention wherever he went. He was strong, smoked 2 packs a day, and he never had a positive thing to say about me or my mother. We never got along. He always thought of me as the thing that ruined his life, and he was never afraid to tell me that. He came into the room while I was rehearsing. What are you doing? Your mom tells me you're going to be in a show. Why the hell would you set yourself up to be laughed at? Hell, I'll laugh at you. You can save yourself the trouble. Because I was listening to what you were doing. It sucks. I hope you're better than that when you get up there on that stage and all those people are staring at you, just waiting for you to screw up. And you will. You're just not that good. Come on, dinner's ready. Dinner was unusually quiet that night. Luckily for me, television is my great escape. And tonight is Battle of the Network Stars. I mean, I love that show. I mean, you got to see celebrities as real people, or at least as real as they let you see them. It was while watching that show that the idea came. Howard Cosell was interviewing the celebrities after each match. I mean, that was it. That's what I could do. Before, I was just introducing the celebrity and then doing the impression. Now what I would do is have Howard Cosell introduce them. The idea surged through me like a shock. I didn't finish watching the program. I ran upstairs and started working. I thought about how great it would be if Howard Cosell was just a regular man on the street interviewing celebrities. I mean, he would introduce the celebrity would come out and say, whatever they were going to say, and then Howard would come out and introduce the next one. Maybe even throwing in a one-liner about how great or how horrible the last celebrity was. And I went to bed on cloud 9 that night. But when I woke up the next morning, all the energy and good feelings of the idea were gone. And in its place were feelings of fear and doubt. I mean, why would anyone care about some kid who can sound like Jimmy Carter or Elvis? I mean, you can see that on The Tonight Show. I mean, Rich Little's on there all the time. He's much better than I am. I decided to take my name off the list to be in the show. But when I got to school that day, I was met with a small surprise. All the people who were going to be in the spring fling were listed on a huge billboard at the front entrance of the school. I mean, how can I back out now? There was my name in big letters, number 23 out of 23. By the time I got home from school that day, my nerves were shot. And when my mom asked me what was wrong, the floodgates opened and I was crying in my mother's arms, telling her all about my fears and doubts. My mom waited a few moments, looked me right in the eye and said, Bobby, 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 you have got to do it for the people that are going to love what you can do. Now, I have always been proud of your talent. Now you show them why. Well, the big night finally came and the auditorium was packed. Mr. Schickele, the school principal, was standing at the stage entrance. And while one person was on stage, the next person was waiting in the wings to go on. They called my name and I was standing backstage watching some kid from another grade doing a ventriloquist act. I was watching his lips move. And somehow, I got courage from it. They called my name and I hit the stage. Now, I would love to tell you that every word out of my mouth was gold. The truth is, I have no idea what I said. All I know is that they were laughing. And they weren't laughing at me, but at what I was doing. Towards the end of the routine, I looked down at my mom, who was sitting in the front row, and she gave me a big thumbs up sign. A signal that my mom still uses to this day to tell me that she enjoyed the show. They cheered. They cheered for me. It was one of the highest highs I've ever had. When we all came out to take our final bow, some of my classmates were up in the balcony and they stood up and started stomping their feet and chanting, Bob, Bob, Bob. Well, I went up front and took another bow. It was at that moment I knew in my heart I wanted to be an actor. It also helped me realize that my father was wrong. And for the first time in my life, I felt like I had just spit right in his face. In the first grade, I started wetting the bed. It was only every once in a while at first, but when it became a weekly occurrence, my mom decided it was time to take me to the doctor. The pediatrician called us into his office, and without even an examination, he marked my fate for the next few years. In all my years as a doctor, I've seen hundreds of cases like this. There's two reasons for your son's bedwetting. Either he's too afraid to get out of bed, in which case I'd put a nightlight in his room, or he's too lazy to get out of bed. My father, after hearing this doctor-approved information, had all the ammunition he needed. His morning ritual for the next few years would be the same. He would get up at 5:30 in the morning. He would come into my room to see if I was wet. He'd make sure to leave the light off so as not to wake me. He would shower, he would shave, he would get dressed. And if I was wet, he would come into my room, he would take off his belt and fold it in half. He would turn on my light, and he'd proceed to wake me by smacking me on the lower back, ass, and upper leg. He would hold me down by placing his hand on my back with the back of my neck, forcing my face into the pillow. He would yell, telling me how lazy I am, and asking me if I enjoyed sleeping in piss. Then he would leave for work. My screams and cries would wake my mother, and she'd come into the room and help me get ready for school. The welts in my ass would sometimes bleed, making it difficult to walk, and sitting was horrible. It was about this point in my life that I started to think of my father as the devil. When I was 10 years old, my sister Tammy was born, and I loved her with all my heart. I swore I would never let the devil hurt her the way he hurt me. After Christmas vacation in the 5th grade, I met David. David was tall and thin with feathered hair. He was into what's new. New music, new clothing. He was all about style. I went over to his place a few times and listened to Billy Joel's 52nd Street album and Supertramp's Breakfast in America. Meeting his mother was the first time I ever met anyone who was drunk in the afternoon. I mean, she came staggering into the room. The smell of vodka was like some kind of perfume for it. Are you fucking kids gonna be in this room all day? Why the fuck don't you go over to his place sometime? She was amazingly pleasant. David's father had left the family a few years ago, and she was raising him on her own. You know, David seemed like a pretty cool kid. He was a bit of a loner like myself. So I invited him over dinner one night. David and my father were instant friends. It was weird to see him relate to David in a way he never would me. Soon, David was coming over just to see my father. See, my father grew up without a dad, and he understood what David was going through, and he wanted to be there for David in a way that no one was ever there for my father. I mean, they went fishing together. I mean, I went along a few times, but I have no interest in fishing, so I stopped going. They did everything together, and he cared about how David was doing in school. David took to sitting on the sidearm of my father's chair while they were watching TV, something I'd only been allowed to do a few times. I mean, the devil never let anyone sit in his chair, and the sidearm was a very coveted position. At least, it was at one time. Soon, it seemed like David was his son, and I was just a friend that tagged along. That's if I went along at all. By the summer, David was over at our place 4 nights a week, sometimes 5, depending on how drunk his mother was. But the attention my father was giving David didn't really bother me that much, because while he was spending time with David, he left me alone. And I never liked being the center of attention when it came to my father. Now, Richard was my best friend, and we did everything together. I mean, we struggled through school together, and on the weekends we hang out at the mall together, because when you grow up in a small town, well, that's what you do. You hang out at the mall. We had our first drink of alcohol side by side, peppermint schnapps. And a few hours later, we dry heaved together side by side. Richard was tall and thin and into working out. He wasn't muscular, but he was strong. His hair was parted exactly in the center, and he wore glasses that made him look like John Lennon. Richard had a bit of an accent that I couldn't quite place, and neither could he. His father was an alcoholic, and they moved around from town to town to town. Richard and I talked about everything, and I mean everything. From how many times we masturbated that day to how far we got with the girls we were seeing. One day, Richard left my house. My father closed the door and gave me a very strange look. Surprised you still hang out with that kid. Richard? Why? You mean you don't know? Don't know what? That he's a fag. What are you talking about? He's a fucking faggot, queer, gay, whatever the fuck you want to call it. He likes guys. How do you know? First off, I could tell. I knew guys like that when I was in the Marine Corps. Man, the shit we used to do to them. Like short sheet their beds, or sometimes we'd put some boots in a duffel bag, and while they were sleeping, we'd whack the fucking shit out of them. So you see, I knew of him before he told me. Now, I don't give a fuck what you do. But if you hang out with a fag, people are gonna think you're a fag. He told you? I'm shocked. I mean, how could Richard tell the devil he's gay and not me? Richard always looked at me as a father figure, just like David did. His father's a drunk and isn't around much. Richard looked at me as the father he never had, just like David did. It didn't make any sense. I could hardly sleep that night. And the next day, I was determined to get to the bottom of it. Richard, look, I have something to ask you, and I want you to be honest with me. Last night, my father, of all people, told me that you were gay. Look, you know, I don't care about any of that. I mean, it has no bearing on our friendship. What I can't understand is how you could tell him and not me. I mean, my God, you are my best friend. I mean, I told you things I'd never tell anyone else. So if it is true, why would you keep it a secret from me? I will always remember his response as the gospel according to Richard. It was like I put a quarter in and pulled his arm and just stood there as the information spewed out at me. Your father told you. Okay. I'm going to tell you all about everything. Yeah, I'm gay. Took me a long time to realize and even longer to accept. But I started dating Donna because people were asking me why I have no interest in girls. And she is a good friend. I like her a lot. But when it came to sex, I just wasn't into it. I've always been attracted to men. And so is your father. That son of a bitch not only helped me realize I was gay, he taught me a lot of things I never even knew. Yeah, your father's gay. And it's not something he came to realize later in life. It's something he's always known. When he was in the Marine Corps, he met a man and they fell very much in love. They were supposed to hop a train and take off together, but the young man never showed up at the station. Your father waited for him for 2 days. He was devastated and went back home. After a few years of not seeing anyone, his family started asking questions, and that's when he met your mom. They started dating, and bang, she became pregnant with you and was forced by her family and his to get married. I mean, he always felt trapped. Look, I know all this must come as a shock to you, but I got a few more things I just got to tell you. Look, your father's first affair on your mother was with your Uncle Porky when he was 10 years old. Porky, like me, was unsure of his sexuality, and your father, well, to hear him tell it, practically raped your uncle and then told him that if he ever told anyone, even thought about it, he'd make sure the whole family found out he was gay. One Christmas, he's fucking Porky up in his room and they could hear you opening your presents downstairs. Porky was just 10 years old. Now, how do you think your grandfather or your Uncle Junior would have reacted to that? Also, David and your father were lovers. I mean, they used to run off all the time and have sex. David was never really your friend. I mean, he only hung out with you to be closer to your father. I mean, he hated you because whenever you were around, he couldn't be as close to your father as he wanted to be. Your father always wanted you to know he was gay. I mean, he told me he secretly wished you had been gay so he could talk to you about it, but he felt if you ever found out, you'd tell your mom. Lastly, I did have sex with your father. Look, unlike David and Porky, I knew what I was getting into. I was no child. I was 13 when it started. And I am not in love with your father. As a matter of fact, I hate him right now because of him telling you about me. I had sex with him for money. Look, he paid me to sleep with him. Look, I was not attracted to him at all, but I sure did love the money. Hold it, now, didn't you think it was weird that sometimes you'd be like, hey, let's go to bingo? And I'd say, I can't go, I don't have any money. But then 20 minutes later, I'd amazingly have $40 in my pocket. Sometimes he'd come up to your room after felt you were asleep and get me. We'd go down in the living room and have sex. He did the same thing with David. Look, I know what he told you. Because I told him I was never going to fuck him again, no matter how much he paid me. Look, I feel better having told you about all this. I really hated keeping it a secret. But I don't think we should hang out anymore. After the truth came out, my father started threatening me, telling me that if this became public, he would kill me. This scared me a lot because once when my father was cleaning his guns, he had a 22 and a 33. He only shot them once a month at a firing range, but he cleaned them a lot. He was cleaning his guns and he turned to my mother and I and said, you know how easy it would be for me to just load this gun and shoot the both of you? Who would miss you? Everyone, including my mom's parents, my mem and pap, never believed Richard's story. They told us that we must have misunderstood. I heard over and over again how my father would never do anything like that, or simply, I don't believe you. My mother and I were isolated, alone, and we had no place to turn emotionally or financially. I became involved in a work program at school and started working about 60 hours a week. It took 2 years for my mother and I to scrape up enough money to move out. We left him, and everyone told us how crazy we were for leaving. Mom and I had to take Tammy over to Mem and Pap's place because both of us were working. And before the devil would go to work, he would stop by my grandparents' place to see my sister. Now, at 7 years old, I would never blame Tammy for this. I mean, she was still Daddy's little girl. But to find out that not only did my grandparents allow him to see her, they invited him to see her, it infuriated me. Don't you tell me who I can have in my house and who I can't. Your sister loves her father and respects him, which is more than I can say for you. There was no talking to Mem. I mean, she was never going to understand. You know, I was so angry, I decided that the next day I was going to go along with my sister over to my grandparents' place. You know, I felt that just the sight of me would piss him off enough that it just may fuck up his day. That made me giggle. As soon as I walked in the door, Mem let me have it. What are you doing here? All you want to do is start trouble. Look, when your father gets here, I want you to wait outside, and I mean it. It didn't take long for him to arrive. He was wearing his armored car uniform, which somehow made him seem even stronger and more powerful than I knew him to be. He stepped one foot in the door, and my sister screamed out, "Daddy!" They ran to each other and hugged. You could see the love they had for each other. And I was wondering when my sister would see the real man. My father and I exchanged glares, and I went out on the porch. It was a beautiful summer day. I lit a cigarette and sat on one of the porch chairs. The whole time I was waiting for him to leave, my anger was growing. The charade he was playing with my grandparents and my sister, the lies, the deception, my mother's pain, my pain. I felt my anger rise in me like I never had before. When he finally stepped out of the house, I jumped up and blurted, "You know, if it was up to me, you'd never see it." "Well, it isn't up to you now, is it? So you should just shut your fucking mouth. And you should tell your faggot friend Richard to do the same." He walked down the 2 steps that led to the walkway that led to his car. "You should know he's a faggot. You fucked him." He stopped just short of his car. I could see his fist clench. How old was Richard again? 13? 14? He turned towards me. Better yet, how old was David? 11, 12, do you even remember? "I'm gonna kick your fucking ass." He came charging at me like a bull with his fists going into target mode. I knew exactly what that hit would feel like. The surprise, a split second before the pain. The taste of blood, a split second before the swelling started. "Hit me." I said it so quietly, I wasn't even sure if he heard, but he must have because his fist held in target mode. I looked the devil right in the eye and I said, "When I was younger, I couldn't do anything about it, and everyone was either too scared or too afraid to butt in. But if you hit me now, I'll throw you in jail so fast your head will spin. So please hit me. I want you to." The devil lowered his fist, turned, walked over to his car, got in, flipped me the bird, and drove off. I watched his car drive out of sight, and then I collapsed on the porch. I mean, my whole body was shaking. I mean, I'd never stood up to him like that before, let alone asked him to hit me. I mean, my God, I was lucky to be alive. I smoked 3 cigarettes, one right after the other. I mean, I was still shaking as I finished the last one. But as the fear started leaving my body, I began laughing. I did it. I stood up to the devil. I felt incredible. I was like Rocky. Da-na-na, da-na-na. Hell, I was better than Rocky. Rocky never beat the devil. Many years later, I was reading a magazine, and in it was the story of this woman, and she talked about being a bedwetter, and when she woke up in the morning, her sheets were soaked. I was sitting on my couch and, I thought about waking up wet all those years ago and just how drenched my Star Wars sheets were. Sometimes the wetness would come all the way up to my chest, and I smiled out of pure understanding of what this woman had gone through. And then I had a thought that hit me really hard. If I was that wet, then why did my father have to check to see if I was wet by touching my genitals? He would come into my room while I was sleeping and touch me to see if I was wet, checking to see if I was wet. That was the way my mind processed it. See, I know this happened because a few times I woke up while he was checking me. I could feel him touching me and then feel his hand quickly slide out from underneath me. And I would lie in that soaking wet bed, terrified and frozen, waiting for the beating that I knew was about to come. Since I was 15 years old and the truth came out, I felt that my father beat me and treated me the way he did in order not to be close to me, so that he wouldn't touch me the way he did the others. But on that day, sitting on my couch with that magazine still in my hands, at 42 years old, I realized he did it to me too. Thank you.
Oh, Bob, can you hear me?
I can. I'm good. How are you?
I need a breath. Actually. And thank you for that really powerful performance. And thank you for
thank you.
telling this story that is so important to tell. And it's very moving. I'm very moved.
Oh, thank you so much. I really appreciate that. Thank you.
A few weeks ago, we were fortunate to have you appear in Smoker, and a terrific show in which you mentioned your abusive father. But this show preceded it. Is that right?
Yeah. This was my very first solo show, and it was really terrifying.
I will bet so. Yeah.
In creating this show, I knew I had a story to tell. I knew there was a really interesting story there that I didn't hear that often, and I really wanted to tell that story. And one of the main things I really wanted to talk about is kind of the cycle of abuse, and how even after you leave your abuser, a lot of that comes back on you, and it's hard to escape that, and you really have to work at that, which some of the show does deal with. But I was actually terrified to write this show. And so Suzanne Bachner, my director and developer, when we were at Great Adventure one day, and over funnel cake and coffee, I told her this whole entire story at Great Adventure. And I was like, I would really like you to write this for me, because I had never written anything and I was absolutely terrified of doing it. And she said, well, I could write that, but I think it would be much more powerful if it came from you and you wrote it. And so I sat down and started writing, and I would send things to her, and Suzanne would be like, keep writing, just keep writing. And so we amassed a whole lot of stuff, and then I wrote a whole lot about growing up, and we kind of whittled it down to really focusing on the story with my father.
Well, I'm so glad you did. Let's go ahead and I'd like to bring into the conversation Suzanne and Evie Yeager. But first, I'd like to remind the audience that posted in the chat is the tip jar, and any support you're able to donate tax deductibly is greatly appreciated.
Yes, please. The Marsh is really incredible, and we are thrilled and honored to be able to participate in that way. So yes, please, if you can help out at all, please do.
Yes, and also we encourage the chat room is now open. We encourage comments and, of course, questions from the audience, which you may post in the chat. We'll answer as many as we can. Our producers, Brian and Brianna, will help us keep an eye on that. And now let me welcome Suzanne. Hello. I want to give you an introduction here. Suzanne is an award-winning playwright and director and a frequent solo show director, developer, and dramaturg, including shows we've enjoyed here on Solo Arts Heal, Gloria Rosen's Listen, Can You Hear Me Now, and Suzanne's own autobiographical story, The Good Adoptee. She is Bob Brader's partner in life and art, and the director and developer of all his internationally acclaimed award-winning solo shows, including his forthcoming new one, It's a Rocky Life. And Suzanne, also, your hit play Circle ran for 5 months off Broadway and had a sold-out 4-month international tour called Ingenious, and it was called Ingenious by the New York Times. So glad to have you here, Suzanne. Welcome.
Thank you. So glad to be here.
Yeah, and also we're very happy to have Evie Yeager, founder and director of TraumaRoot, with us. Evie is an advocate, writer, and educator on the subject of trauma, who brings a decade of experience on education, communication, and community health and emergency management to her work. TraumaRoot's mission is to support individuals and groups in developing a functional understanding of trauma and in facilitating recovery and resilience for themselves and others. Through training and consulting, TraumaRoot aims to make trauma education more affirming, accessible, and actionable. And we're going to be posting these links for TraumaRoot and all Suzanne and Bob in the chat as we continue our talk. So welcome to Evie.
Thank you.
Good, so good to have you here. We talked a little bit, Bob, but I wanted to ask you now with Suzanne here how you came to write this show and how the show has changed and grown as you've performed and toured it.
Wow. Well, the biggest change was I started doing this show as kind of a desk monologue. Like Spalding Gray, who was one of my heroes. He always sat behind a desk and he would tell his stories behind a desk. And so that's the way it started.
And that's why I knew Bob needed to tell his own story, because he said, he always talked about Spalding Gray as being his hero. And so it was obvious that he needed to write it himself. And that's what did happen.
Yeah.
But it did start out as a desk monologue.
Yeah. And while it was still terrifying to tell that story, it was very safe behind the desk. It felt that there was a separation kind of from me, from the audience. So I felt a little safer telling the story behind a desk. And then we were in New Jersey doing a talkback. And
this was actually our first talkback ever. And so I was on stage with Bob, and I actually was sort of watching him on stage answering a question from an audience member, and I said, "Oh, this is actually what I've been trying to peel this one layer off of the show to make it to have Bob a little more Bob and natural Bob." And I said, "Oh, the desk has got to go." And I knew that this was not going to go over well at all.
It didn't. It was not good. That was my safety blanket. I did not want that to go at all. Mm-hmm. But once the desk was removed, it opened the show up in such a huge way.
I'll bet someone in the chat says, what made you to decide to perform this yourself instead of having another actor do it? Because it must be so hard to relive it each time.
But that's not. The thing is that you're not reliving it. I mean, to me, the hardest part was writing it. I mean, that was hard. That was painful. A lot of tears. I was smoking at that time, a lot of smoking, and so it was incredibly painful to write and get down on paper. But afterwards, in the learning process and in the acting process, it's not reliving it. Now I have to stand here, I have to do the voice here, I have to do this, I have to do this movement. So it's not like you're reliving it. Do I have those memories? Absolutely. But I think that also helps me in the telling of the story, because I can see that, I can see the porch where I'm sitting there smoking, waiting for him to come out. I can see the Star Wars sheets that I wore, pajamas and sheets that I had. So I like all of that's in my head. So it makes it easier to tell, but it's not a reliving of it. I think you really need that separation. And I think when you write something like that, you give it a separation. It's there, and you got it out on paper. And to me, this show and writing it was one of the best things that I ever did for myself in getting over a lot of the trauma or getting through a lot of the trauma, is being able to write about it and perform the show.
Mm-hmm. Well, you do it so vividly, and I really applaud the performance and
Thank you.
What you've done here. And I want to ask Evie, bringing you into the conversation. Thanks again for being here. Can you give us a basic definition of trauma as it relates to this show?
Sure. So trauma is an event or environment, and it changes our senses of safety, control, and humanity, and has lasting effects on our brain, body, and behavior. So trauma is not like a bad day that you just get over after a while. It doesn't go away on its own. There are lots of different ways to work through trauma, like talking to someone about what happened, or using a physical practice like breath work or exercise to feel more safe and in control of your body, or using creative expression to process it, as Bob does so beautifully. But we have to address it and not just wait it out for healing to happen.
So what else would you want people to know about dealing with trauma?
Well, since trauma changes our senses of safety, control, and humanity, then recovering from trauma involves restoring or reimagining those things. So that's a complex and challenging process that takes time and effort, and it's different for every person. If you've experienced trauma, it's important to know that the things that make you feel safe, feel in control, and feel like yourself won't be exactly the same as for anyone else. There's a lot of judgment about how people deal with trauma, and it's important to give ourselves and each other the space to do what works for us individually. Bob talks a lot about the impact of connecting with other people as a way to heal and to support others' healing. And to be honest, I'm pretty much in awe of how great he is at that. I know Bob gets a lot of comments from people about how they think he or his mother should have acted differently in that situation. And as a survivor of trauma myself, I've also been questioned about how I deal with it. It's pretty frustrating. But Bob is so excellent about sharing his own experience without telling anyone else how to feel or what they should do in their own situation. I'll also say, since Bob asked me to talk about this, when trauma happens to us as children, we have a few more things working against us. We might not have the social context to really understand what happened to us, or we might not have the language to express it. Without an adult to help us process that pain and develop the coping skills to manage it, we might be forced to bury it or kind of explain it away in order to cope. And then as adults, that leaves us with a really long road ahead. Even if we knew as children at the time that something was wrong, it might take years for us to fully unpack it all and kind of understand it from that new adult perspective.
Yes, absolutely. As Bob kind of shows in the performance that he did when he tried to tell people about what he knew, he was gaslighted. This is a word that I think about a lot in terms of, people telling you, oh, it's just in your mind. Oh, no, that isn't possible. They just aren't paying attention to what you're trying to tell them. And he had the strength, Bob, had the strength, you and your mother, to actually, get the resources together and leave the house and do what you did. How do you deal with that, Evie, when you have, that kind of, or I guess I could ask, all of you, dealing with that gaslighting and finding the strength to, move forward and stick to your guns and the trauma that is happening to you?
I think that's for you, Bob. You go, and I'll bet. Go ahead.
We both have things to say on that, I'm sure.
Right. For me, at least in my situation, I mean, when you talk about my grandparents, my grandparents were very loving people. They were very loving, caring people. And they so didn't want in any way to see my father as being this monster. Because if my father...
They were his parents, right?
No, they were my mom's parents. His parents, his mother passed away, like 10 years earlier, before all of this came out.
Interesting, significant.
Yeah.
Her own parents, yeah.
But it was my mom's parents. They didn't want to believe it because he had come into the family. They loved him. They trusted him. If he was this monster, they didn't see it. So how could that happen? How could they allow that, a person to marry their daughter? How could they have this person in their life?
Right.
How could they see him like that when they trust that he, or want to trust him?
Well, they also sort of forced the marriage so that you had an
Right.
even bigger responsibility there.
So it's all like, yeah.
And the other thing that's in the show that isn't in this particular excerpt is just how beloved and charismatic he was in terms of being a man about town in that community.
Right.
So it was even easier for people to deny, the truth about him because he was that embraced and thought of so well.
Right.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. The Mark Frame asked, somebody said in the chat, as a solo performer, I'm curious about how you were able to share this. I'm always afraid that it will come back to me through my family's own denial. How did you find the courage to present it publicly? And this is what we're talking about.
We're having an electrical issue, so perhaps we can...
Hold on, I'll answer that. You want to try and figure that out?
I will do that.
All right. It comes from you just have to be okay with it. You have to be okay with telling that story. Mm-hmm. I mean, I was ready for people to come at me and say, well, that didn't happen. I still have relatives who don't believe that it happened at all, and talk about me behind my back and say, well, he says horrible things about his father and he has no respect and all that other stuff. But I, you can't worry about that. I mean, you just can't, because you have to get your truth out.
Yes.
I think that's vital. I think that's really important.
Right.
And it's my truth. You can have a different truth and you can choose to believe what you want to believe, but I have to get out my truth and I have to get out what I need to say.
And get past the shame.
Right, exactly. And that's so important. I've
learned from. Evie, how would you like to add to that in terms of gaslighting?
And I think everything Bob said was great. I don't know that I can add much. I guess I would say in a situation like Bob's, when the people in your circle are the same people in the abuser's circle, it's really disorienting because the people you trust the most might also be the people who trust your abuser. So maybe don't be afraid to reach outside that circle to share your story, because those people won't be as invested in believing your abuser. But also, like, if you need to take your time and not tell anyone for a while, that's okay too. You get to decide who you tell and when and how much. But also, it can be really discouraging and disorienting and dehumanizing to share your story and have it met with doubt or shame or guilt. But sometimes people can surprise you. So when you're ready, let yourself try again to share with someone else and give them the opportunity to support you.
That's great.
Right. But also know that these kind of things, when you talk about these kind of issues, it will affect people in different ways. Because the first ever review I got for Spitting in the Face of the Devil was a guy who said that after the show, he wanted to come over and punch me.
Really?
And he ripped the show apart. And Suzanne actually hid that review from me. She was like, she didn't want me to see it. She hid it from me. I found it and I read it and I was like, wow, this show triggered him in some way. It touched him in some way. He had a very intense reaction. And, you know, I've seen tons of bad theater. It never made me want to punch an actor in the face. So I feel that there was something there that really got to him.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what you're doing with theater, right? I mean, that's what you want. You want people to have reactions from what you're doing. I mean, I don't want everyone to have a visceral reaction like that, but he had to deal with something. And I think that after he left the theater, maybe hopefully he sat down and tried to figure out why he had that kind of reaction.
Mm-hmm.
Right?
Was this a critic or is this just an audience member?
No, it was a critic.
It was a critic. And
Yeah,
Suzanne, so I wanted to ask you how audiences have reacted to the show. So I want to hear about that. But Suzanne, why did you hide that from him? What was your thinking?
Well, this all happened so quickly that we were actually able to premiere the show.
Yeah.
And I think that was good because Bob couldn't, second guess anything about it and what have you. And this is, by the way, when we were friends and colleagues. So
yeah.
So that was the start of our collaboration. And basically we hadn't had that discussion of, do you want to see the reviews or do you not want to see the reviews? Mm-hmm. And this particular critic actually bought a ticket. So we were not even alerted. This has been previews and we were not alerted to the fact that this guy was even there.
Right.
So it was a very odd situation, but we hadn't had the conversation of, do you want to see reviews or do you not want to see reviews? And I actually think that Bob's way of dealing with stuff, he has to see everything. Like now I know that, and now we, have sorted that communication problem out. Definitely. So now I know Bob has to know everything, and he's not going to read a review and take a note from it or change something because of a review in the middle of a run or anything like that. Mm-hmm. But it's sort of going to what Evie was saying about what you were saying, Evie, about sort of needing that empowerment and control. Like Bob needed that in terms of what anyone was saying about the show. Like that was something he needed.
Right, because
I didn't know that at the time. And
people will come up to you at some point and say, "Oh, saw that review." And if you're not knowledgeable on it, you're at a loss. So what happened? Or what did they say? What happened? Right. So I always like to know these things.
Sure, good. And Evie, oh, I'm sorry.
Well, you were asking about how audience reaction, and I was honored. We were performing in Nova Scotia, and it was right before a hurricane, which got dropped down to a tropical storm. But we were in this attic theater. It was like 100 degrees in there. And I tend to sweat a lot. And given that situation, I was totally drenched after the show. And we performed Spitting in the Face of the Devil. And after the show, I talked to audience members and everything like that. People often want to come up to me and talk to me after shows and make sure that I'm okay. And this man came up to me and gave me this gigantic hug. And he said, "You have to keep telling your story because I'm not strong enough to tell mine."
Wow.
And those are the kind of reactions that we've got from doing this show.
Wonderful. That's good. Well, thank you.
So I never expected those kind of reactions. I never expected that kind of thing to happen. But it did. A lot of people that have gone through similar situations have been able to come and enjoy the show.
There's a lot of people that have gone through those. And right now we're in a situation where we're having an enormous amount of domestic and sexual violence happening as people are in isolation. And, I want to ask Evie, if we know someone who has experienced abuse, how can we support them?
Sure. There are a few different ways. First, recognize that it might be very difficult difficult for this person to talk to you about it. So let them decide how much they want to tell you and when. And while you might feel really overwhelmed with your own reactions to this, try to keep that to yourself for the moment and let them speak freely. Resist the urge to make assumptions, even well-meaning ones, about what they might be feeling or what they might need. Instead, ask how you can support them. And if they don't know what they need, you can offer options, but not recommendations. Because trauma involves losing a sense of control, if you're pushing certain choices on someone, even in an attempt to help them, it can still be hurtful or harmful. Remember that there are a wide range of responses to trauma, and help them understand that whatever they're thinking or feeling, it's okay, even if you don't personally relate to it or understand it. And restrict your questions at first, even if you're feeling really curious or concerned. Let the person speak however is comfortable for them, because hitting them with a lot of questions right off the bat make them feel like you don't believe them, which can make them shut down. If you do ask questions, make them open-ended so they have the flexibility in telling you only what they feel comfortable telling you. So instead of asking, do you want to do A or B, ask, what do you want to do? Also, I could say more, but I know we're short on time. So on the resource page for Spitting in the Face of the Devil on the JMTC website, there's several specific websites and phone numbers you can reference. I think they're also in the chat box.
Yes, thank you so much for mentioning those. It's very important because we are short on time. It always goes so fast. But I am so grateful to all of you for being here and for telling this story. A couple of notes from the chat. Someone wanted to know, how did you make peace with your mother not protecting you? They struggle with forgiveness, even though I love her very much. I just want.
The thing is that my mother and I were struggling together. My mom was very young when she had me. She was 20 years old. And she had grown up in an abusive family also. So being in this situation, right, it was not something that was an unknown thing or, oh my God, this is bad. This was like, oh, this is what I grew up with. This is normal. This is how things are. This is how fathers and sons are. This is the way it is. So it wasn't an emergency situation. It was just the way families are. Because she grew up with that. So my mom and I struggled together to get out of that situation. He had total control, money-wise, and in every single aspect. He was a bully, and he had total and complete control. And when you are in that kind of situation, it really can look helpless, and you can feel like there is no way out. There is nothing you can do. That's
and
another
the bully's going to keep that because he wants the control. He wants to keep.
Right, and that was another reason why it took 2 years for us to scrape up the money to move out. And you even go back and forth on it sometimes. You're like, well, maybe we don't need to move out right now. Maybe things will be okay, and these kind of things, it'll get better. And then, of course, that doesn't happen. And you're like, oh, no, we have to really work at it, and we have to keep going. There's a lot of back and forth when you're trying to also get that momentum and get that and get over that fear and get over those hurdles that are there when you're trying to leave that kind of situation.
But this is a woman who is telling her little boy how much she believed in him and to believe in himself.
Yeah.
Yes.
And Bob has basically shared this with me, and I think you wouldn't be upset if I shared this, just that Bob would not be sitting here right now with us sharing the story if she hadn't done that. She was an angel protecting him and strengthening him so that they could both escape with Bob's sister Tammy.
Yeah.
And gave you the power to do what you did and really be the man of the house and be able to do what you did. So it's a tremendously wonderful story, and I thank you so much for being here. I do have to close, and I want to say a very special thank you to you, Bob Brader, Suzanne Bachner, Evie Yeager, for tonight's featured presentation of Spitting in the Face of the Devil. You're going to find more information at jmtctheater.com and also, of course, at the Marsh website. This and other contact links for this evening's show are posted in the chat with the tip jar. Look for upcoming Solo Art Teal shows on the Marsh stream and much more at themarsh.org. And next week, August 26th, an actor, writer, and director you've seen in television, film, and on the New York stage, Lester Thomas Shane in Mortal Coil, Voices from the Hospice. A compelling series of striking monologues, this solo show presents a single night on a hospice unit by writer-actor Lester Thomas Shane, who portrays 13 characters, patients, caregivers, and staff who face death and embrace life with unique insight, deep compassion, and gentle humor. Mortal Coil has played across the country and internationally, and the video is used by many hospices as part of their training. Cleveland Jewish News said, Shane steps into the hearts, minds, and feelings of these characters. At once moving, tearful, and funny, Shane gives us window not only to the world of hospice, but what it means to be mortally human. So we will be looking for an excerpt from Lester Thomas Shane and Mortal Coil, and at Talkback we'll be joined with San Francisco General Hospital palliative care specialist and nurse practitioner Natasha Curry. So we look forward to seeing you again. Thank you to our guests, to our Zoom and YouTube audiences, Marsh Stream producers Brian and Brianna, and to you, my friend Stephanie Weissman. We're all in this together. See you next week.
What a wonderful show, Gail. What a wonderful show, Bob and Suzanne, and thank you. Evie, thrilled that you're at Marsh Stream tonight. Thrilled that you told your story, Bob. It's such a deeply moving and informative story, and people who are suffering similar things, I'm sure, are quite relieved, or whatever the word is, for what happened. And thank you. And please join us at Marsh Stream. Keep us sustainable and live. Give us a tip. Support us. As I said, the donations tonight are matched. Join me tomorrow night with Jacob Kornbluth at Stephanie's Marsh Stream, and this weekend with Merle Kessler, the important announcement. Thank you so much, and see you soon. And stay safe and healthy, and let the fires not get you. Let the COVID not get you. Thank you very much. See you soon. Bye.